Hey, welcome NASCAR fans to our weekly recap of the weekend Sprint Cup action. This week we're going to talk about the Irwin Tools night race at Bristol Motor Speedway. I'm Charlie Turner, joined by my partner in crime, Dan Beaver. Hey, Dan, how are you?
I'm doing great.
So,
Starting to
did,
cool
so
off.
yeah. So, did your
Starting to cool
favorite
off a little
race?
bit.
I'm sorry. Did your
Uh,
favorite race live up to your expectations at your favorite track?
uh, More or less, yeah, yeah. I was one of the people who had to watch it on the alternate channel, so
Ah,
the sound was pretty bad because apparently KSAT, the local affiliate in San Antonio, doesn't own a map. They had a preseason race or a preseason football game that didn't even have a Texas team in it. So
oh, wow.
I joined the rest of the people affected in being just really annoyed by all that.
Yeah, we're kind of running into that time of year when NASCAR runs up against the National Football League, and you get some of these conflicts, and NASCAR generally loses when those things happen. Unfortunately for us race fans, but we kind of understand that the NFL's still the big dog on the block whenever you're matched up against them. But this was certainly the Bristol Night Race. I think is probably one of the top three or four races on the Sprint Cup Series every year. This one lived up. Luckily, we lucked out good weather and everything. It was a great setting. Fantastic race. Third race win by Joey Logano for 2014, and kind of sets him up, I think, as a legit contender for the Sprint Cup crown this year. How do you feel about that?
Now, I agree. Conventional wisdom at the moment says that it's going to be a two-organization battle. It's going to be Hendrick versus Penske. And you look at the top of the board, you've got five drivers tied with three wins apiece. They all happen to be Hendrick and Penske drivers. That means they've won two-thirds of the races that have been contested up until now. And if the pattern continues, no reason really to think that it won't. They should win 8 of the final 12 races. Of course, that kind of glosses over the fact that we don't know what this new format's going to be like. We don't know what the new format's going to do. And I suspect that points are going to be a lot more important when you get into the final 10 races than they have been all season long. But these are also the drivers, with maybe with the exception of Jimmy Johnson, who've got the most points. They've been at the top of the points battle in all this time. So there are going to be a couple of paths to get there, and I suspect each driver is going to take their own path. But Logano, he can get there now. We now know that he can get there by winning races, and that's important.
Yeah, and this was he's been a contender. We want to talk specifically, I think, about this race without getting too much into the season overall. But Joey has shown, I think, throughout the season, he's been a consistent contender every week. He was strong, certainly all night Saturday night, along with a couple of other drivers who have been good this year too. Kevin Harvick had another strong race. Denny Hamlin's not too happy with him, but that kind of stuff happens at a place like Bristol.
Yep.
Any comment there? Did you see anything real wrong? I don't know. I thought kind of as a racing deal myself, but
As a racing deal, I think the biggest comment on Harvick is it's notable that he created the problem that took him out of contention this time,
yeah,
but that it was still a problem that took him out of contention. This team has got to stop making mistakes if they're going to contend for the championship. Harvick should have battled for the victory. If it had been in the top 5 in the closing laps, who knows? Could have been a different scenario. He certainly would not have been as patient as Keselowski was when Logano ran up on Gordon to lap him towards the end. So you got to think that Harvick probably would have smelled blood in the water, maybe a little bit more than Keselowski did, and tried to pounce, and that could have altered the end of the race.
yeah.
But
Brad Stilt made a dive there at the end of that last lap. He closed it up a lot quicker or a lot closer than I thought he was going to. I thought he was going to be able to there with that final dive coming out of, I think, out of 2 maybe.
yeah, he did, but he wasn't going to wreck Logano.
No, that's
Har-
true. Yeah.
Harvick might have, and Logano might have wrecked Harvick if the situations had been. But the two teammates were going to take each other out certainly, and now they won't have anything to win by doing that, except maybe some additional bonus points. And
Yeah.
I don't know if those bonus points are really going to make the big difference.
Yeah, and then they would have had to put up with the come to Papa session with Roger Penske too. I don't think either one of them want to do that.
Yeah.
So the one guy we kind of called out going into this race that we thought would maybe make a run at it was the other Hendrick driver, I guess, Casey Kane, who's just not been able to get it, not been able to get that win, and really didn't do much at all in this race. I was kind of surprised. He ran maybe around 10th place for a good portion of the race and then faded. Surprised by that?
Yeah, a little bit. I thought with that much on the line, I thought they would get it right. I thought they'd get everything right. The other driver that we talked about with so much on the line was Kenseth, and he did. Top 5 finish for him. So it says to me that Kane is not prepared to challenge. This upcoming week, and I know we're talking about Bristol, but this is kind of his last chance. Bristol and Atlanta were his last 2 chances. Really, I mean, there's going to be so much going on at Richmond that nobody wants to put it off to the last minute. And I just don't think that Kane's got what the other drivers have at Hendrick Motorsports. And for a long time, it was Kane and Gordon kind of were lagging behind. Gordon found something new this year. Kane hasn't, but they're both in the same shop, and might be something with that shop.
Yeah, maybe. This is Atlanta is a good track for Casey Kane, though, so maybe he can pull something out this week. The two Busch brothers were other drivers we talked about going into the race that both had the potential to do really well. They did run well. They ran up front all night, didn't really cause any massive wrecks or any problems. Just didn't have enough to get up there with the guys that were running first and second most of the night.
Yeah, and even though Kyle Busch, the wreck that he got into wasn't of his making, he didn't need to be where he was.
Yeah,
he got tagged
right.
for speeding. So did Johnson at the exact same time.
Right.
Johnson managed to get up out of harm's way. Kyle didn't. And I think that, to me, that speaks to his kind of inability to deal with frustration and hardship. When something goes wrong, it's too easy for him to self-destruct. And then Kurt Busch, you could say the same thing about him most weeks too, and he managed to finish 5th. So
he had a nice quiet Kurt Busch week.
He did, and didn't slap the wall, didn't drive over his head. And you never know with him. Sometimes he's going to, sometimes he's not. So he's kind of a hard driver to predict. But he's one of the drivers with 5 victories apiece. He's the one that came closest to winning since Gordon didn't, and that was a surprise.
It was. We've also talked a bit over the last several weeks about how it seems that that 48 team, Jimmy Johnson and Chad Canales, are trying things, playing games with tires or whatever. Been an inordinate number of tire problems when other Hendrick Racing teammates have not had those. He didn't have tire problems this week, but he had really an almost unheard of mistakes. 2 speeding on pit road penalties. That's not Jimmy Johnson like.
No, it's not, and maybe now that they've stopped experimenting with setups, etc., and he's experimenting with his aggression, with how much he can get out of it. Mm-hmm. I don't know that Bristol's the best place to do that. So probably was just, everybody has an off week, and this was his. Still rebounded to finish well, and I think that speaks well.
It does. I mean, it just shows the strength of that team. They never seem to get flustered. They a couple weeks ago, or what was it, a week before last, when at Michigan they had the shifter broken shifter problem. They managed to work themselves back up to a top 10 there. Did the same thing this week at Bristol. I think that's pretty impressive.
And on the heels of a 5-race streak of no top 10s, most of which were outside the top 25. So they rebounded, and you never can count them out. It's easy to talk about whether or not there's a problem there whenever they do things like they've done the last few seasons at this stage of the season, but you really can't count them out. They're just they're not bulletproof, but they're darn close.
Yeah. 2 races left. Anybody race themselves out of contention for the Cup this week?
Probably not with that win and in scenario, and we're firmly into that now. Um, Still have a shot at it. I think Jamie McMurray is the driver most likely to not make much of a splash the next 2 weeks after making kind of a surprising splash this week.
Yeah, he
Gets
looked.
got another shot to win. But go ahead.
I said, yeah, he looked good this week.
Yeah, yeah, and there were Bristol's become this way. You get some surprise drivers at the front of the pack since they ground that upper groove. It's made it more into a wild card race just because. Actually, I don't know why, but it's become one of the more difficult tracks to predict. In terms of sweeps, no one swept the top five. Only a couple of drivers swept the top 10, and that puts it down towards the bottom of that list of track sweeps over the last couple of years. And I think only 6 drivers swept the top 15. So it's not like a lot of people came close.
Anybody surprise you with a poor performance? Anybody that you expected to do well that just kind of didn't show?
I think Gordon highlights that.
Mm-hmm.
We expected him to challenge for the win, especially after he started on the front row. As soon as he got back in traffic, the car just went off. He was complaining about it actually when he was running in the top five, but Gordon is a driver that really needs clean air, it seems, more than anyone else with how he sets up his car. It's worked for him so far this season, but you feel like he's walking a tightrope, walking a razor's edge, and you're just not sure when he's going to fall off. This week he fell off. He finished 16th. But to talk about him struggling and finishing 16th is, a lot of drivers would like to have that. He does have the capacity, or he's showing the capacity now that he can win, and that might be his path to productivity in the final 10 races.
It's funny that you mentioned his preference for clean air driving because I've heard him at 2 different post-race pressers this year, both at one at Michigan, both at Michigan, and both times he commented almost in a I don't want to say afraid because race car drivers are not afraid, but there's he's uptight about racing in traffic on those fast tracks, and it doesn't sound when you hear him talk about it like he's uncomfortable with the way his car is particularly handling. He just doesn't like the way this particular package races in traffic. I don't think he's gotten comfortable with that overall. So I don't know how that's going to play out over the next 12 races, but it's something to keep an eye on. Any place where we're likely to be racing a lot of traffic. I take Talladega out of that because I think he's used to plate tracks, but maybe a place like Richmond, something like that, he might be uptight, or Bristol, or Dover,
Yeah, well, we've also got 4 cookie cutter tracks, similarly configured mile and a half tracks in the chase, and I think he was fairly lucky to not have to deal with traffic a lot at Michigan. He had a good enough car that and good enough strategy that he could stay in the lead. This week at Atlanta, a couple of weeks in Chicagoland could be pivotal for him. He's going to need to do well on those courses. But he's one of 2 drivers who swept the cookie cutter courses this year, along with Matt Kenseth. They're the only drivers with top 10s in the first 5 races on this track type. So, you may be more on the mark, but the problems may come on those shorter tracks, Richmond and Dover.
Well, it will be something to watch, and we'll be watching. We'll be back next week to talk about. We'll recap or rewind the race at Atlanta Motor Speedway, one of my favorite racetracks. At one time the fastest track on the circuit, and still one of the fastest. I like it. I know Dan likes it. We'll be back. He's Dan Beaver. You can follow Dan on Twitter at Fantasy Race. Follow me on Twitter at OnPitRow. We'll be back next Tuesday again to talk about Atlanta. Dan, thanks for your time. We'll do this again soon.
Thank you.